I don't see Mop,
That's right.
and I don't know the next one you're missing.
BFA.
Okay, you're right.
Yep.
There's
Yep.
no it's like a silver bluish thing.
Yeah. No, I actually have the one for the classic re-release, but I don't have it up on there on the stack. I need to get it up there. But anyway,
Nice.
that's not why we're
Anyways,
here.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. We're all here.
All right. Well, Morgan and Steve, thanks for joining us today. My name is Athalus from Warcraft Radio, and I've got my friend here, TruVillainManny from the For Azeroth podcast. And so far, it's been an exciting first day of BlizzCon. I feel like, Steve, we've seen a lot of you today. Morgan, not so much.
Less
Yep.
so. Sorry.
Less so? No, that's okay. But I want to jump right in. So we've got a number of questions. Obviously, we saw a bit about patch 9.1 today, and there's certainly a lot to unpack there. But one thing I want to do is I want to kind of take a step back and reflect on maybe a little bit from 9.0. And I know you guys just want to talk about the future. I promise we'll do plenty of that. So Morgan, I did an interview about a year ago with Ian about race to world first progression and things of that nature. And I just want to talk with both of you that may have a raid perspective on this. Castle Nathria. We went from Nyalotha, which people enjoyed, but then we got Castle Nathria, and it's like being universally looked at as one of the best raids of all time. I feel like. What changed? I mean, did something change? Did you reflect on Nyalotha? Was there a different process going into this? What were some of the things that you felt like you learned from Nyalotha that you applied in your design process for Nathria? And then what are some things that you've learned from Nathria that you feel like you're applying towards the next raid that we're looking at?
Yeah, totally. We look at all of our raid tiers as an opportunity to really dig into and sell first and foremost the story of what we're trying to sell with, whether it be Castle Nathria with the launch of Shadowlands, or the Chains of Domination. I'm sorry, the Sanctum of Domination with the Chains of Domination. Get those mixed up sometimes. Um, and Castle Nathria, very early on, we knew that there was so much rich story to tell with Castle Nathria, and one of our very first concept pieces of concept art from Revendreth, like you might have seen at BlizzCon when we announced Shadowlands in the first place, had that huge epic castle right in the middle of Revendreth. And when we all saw that, we were like, so we're gonna raid that, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
that's where we're going. Like, you could have known nothing about the story. You just knew you wanted to go in there. And we really tried to just sell that story and that fantasy. And with Lord Denathrius himself and all of the other things that was going on with the anima drought and the huge anima vaults that you discover while you're progressing through there. That's something that we always look to try to pay off. And I don't know that there's a specific thing that we really look back on Nyalotha and said, hey, let's avoid doing that. It's really just about trying to take the themes that we have to work within and make the best of them. And with something like Castle Nathria, as well as the Sanctum of Domination, there's so much to work with. There's so many cool characters. You learn a lot about these people as you're progressing through the Chains of Domination update. And also, there's some really cool characters in Sanctum of Domination that you would remember. Something that we always look to do when we're developing a raid zone is to make sure that not only is there a cast of new characters that you're excited to kind of take it to, but there's also some memorable faces in there. That's something that with Nyalotha we had less opportunity there because there's all these old god creatures versus something like Castle Nathria where you're in the Shadowlands or the Sanctum of Domination. There's so much history to draw from, and you might have seen the what's next panel where Jeremy mentioned that there are some big bads from our past that we will
Yeah.
be seeing again and revisiting with characters like Kel'Thuzad. So that's something that we always look to try to make sure we're hitting those really awesome epic story beats, and also have things that keep you grounded in Warcraft's history.
Yeah, I think when people are looking at the quality of a raid, like they're obviously looking at story beats like you talk about and design elements. They're also looking at balanced experiences and bosses that get progressively harder and what tier are we in the expansion. Should the first tier be easier? And what was really interesting to me about with Castle Nathria is that you all right off the bat went for challenging just right away, right? You didn't hold back. You just kind of went for it right off the bat. Did you feel like you hit the mark that you were looking for in that? People generally starting to kind of get gated up on Sludge Fist and that sort of thing?
Yeah, we always have a pretty rigorous tuning process that we go through. We work a lot with the combat team, the encounter guys.
Right.
We're always communicating with them. We try to get the best sense of what we can with the new meta progression systems that have come out. So with Shadowlands, we've got Renown, you've got Conduits, you've got Soulbinds. There's also Legendaries that are making a return. So we spent a lot of time trying to make sure that we had a really clear understanding of the impact that would have on, the player's power. So that's something that as we, were progressing through the Shadowlands beta, we were trying to get those features to players' hands as quickly as possible so that we could make those tuning changes. And another really big thing that changed this time around, which is, in some ways made tuning a bit easier, and in other ways it did make it a bit more difficult, was, with Shadowlands, we removed the ability for items to Titan Forge and Warforge.
Right.
So we had a much clearer picture of what the player's power would be from not only having a really good understanding of all these meta progression systems, but also knowing, okay, when they come in the raid, they're going to have this gear. And there was a lot less wiggle room there this time around than what we might have seen in some of the previous expansions raids. Were
you still surprised to see things like stacking 4 unholy DKs, at the top end, right?
Nothing surprises me anymore. I've seen enough of these raids where, we always try to design our encounters so that certain classes have different strengths and weaknesses can really shine, right?
Yeah.
You want to have that opportunity to feel like a hero in this fight or on the next fight. And, when we're talking about people who are, working at that level, they will find any little thing that they can do to, optimize as best they can. So when we see certain things like that, we're like, yeah, they're strong on this fight by a little bit. So of course we're going to see more of them. And we always do try, towards the, back end of the raids to make sure that we're testing enough of those elements of combat and class design that, you might try to stack early on, but then maybe you're going to hit a different, road bump in the fight where you have to, kind of take a step back and look at what your composition is again, and maybe you have to switch it around. So that eventually it turns into a much more balanced composition there.
Manny, why don't you go ahead?
I have to say that in the raid, you had so many things that were then reflected in the outside world. Once you got through Sun King, you then saw Kel'Thuzad waiting for you if you were event there. Or once you defeated Sire Denathrius, all the ammo was cut off and it was no longer flowing into the maw. Are we going to see events in the next raid also reflect in the outside world, even if it is in the maw? One thing that you have shown is that we're going to see the true eye of the jailer. Mm-hmm. Is it going to be that once we take out the true eye, we'll no longer be dealing with the eye of the jailer system?
Steve, do you want to take that one? I can, or?
Well, I'll just say
that's really awesome, but spoilery. So
yeah, I'll just say that. I'll say that in general. Yeah, we really like having some consequences for the encounters that you face, and in the past, a lot of the times, certainly there's been cases where the story was all dependent upon the last boss of a raid being downed to kind of get the completion.
Right.
And we're being more mindful of putting more story in other places so that even if you're not a cutting edge raider, you can still see story progression continuing. And an example of that is the Covenant campaigns and things like that. And you'll definitely see that sort of thinking going forward in Chains of Domination and future updates, because we feel like there's a good a couple tracks there that you can follow. And eventually people will get both of them, but we don't want to feel like your progression on learning the story is blocked because you're not at that last raid boss yet.
But yeah, I mean, like you mentioned it earlier, seeing that anima flow kind of switching on and off and having an impact on the having an impact on the world based on the story that played out in front of you is something that we really, really love to try to execute on anytime that we can. Even going back to, I think one of the first times I can remember doing that was in Tomb of Sargeras, right? After you had to kill Jaden, and then you get out of the raid and you look up at the sky and you're like, that's not supposed to be there, right?
Yeah.
Argus is just in the sky at that point.
Yeah.
And that's something that we think is a really, really cool opportunity.
Well, yeah, without getting specific, I can say that when you complete the Sanctum of Domination raid, you will see a very visible difference in the Shadowlands.
Yeah,
Very,
very vague.
For.
good vague booking. I like it. That's great.
That's enough to get me.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to touch on is, it was almost a watershed moment, I feel like, for the World of Warcraft community. You get down to the end of the Race to World first. You've got 2 guilds under 5% at the same time. Everyone's watching. I'm sure you guys were probably watching at that point. Those are great moments. And I think one of the things that you guys have capitalized on in the past, maybe not for a viewership audience necessarily, but are these sort of Mythic-Only phases, right? These things that people really look forward to. They don't happen very often, but when they do, they're usually very impactful. Things like getting to the end of High Mall, and I like to say it's the Kool-Aid man, like, oh yeah, busting in kind of thing. Are we looking at any of that in Shadowlands? Can we say with definitiveness that at least one of these tiers will have something like that? Is that something that you guys think about every raid and you say, no, we're not going to do it this time? Is that important to you?
I don't think we don't think of it as like a box we need to check.
Yeah.
Right? Like the High Mall example you gave, we felt like there was a really cool story opportunity there.
Sure.
With Cho'Gall and Margok and what the heck was going on here, and selling that in a way, or executing on that in a way that wasn't just gonna feel like it's a pushover. Like this is something that, okay, cool, this is Cho'Gall, he's a really big deal. We have to do this justice. So we always look at opportunities to add something like that where it makes sense from a story perspective. With Denathrius, he had multiple floors, and we were really taking the fight to him in his castle.
Yeah.
And it didn't really feel like it would have fit without feeling kind of forced. Like maybe we could have added a 3rd floor.
Sure.
Like we definitely talked about it from the perspective of like, hey, it might be cool, but it would just feel forced. Like, could we do this? Yes. Would it make sense? Not really. It would just feel like, yeah, they're ticking a box off. Where when we do it, we really want it to feel memorable and special. And we've seen things like that in the past with, in Siege of Orgrimmar when you fought Garrosh, and there was that Mythic-Only phase. There was a story to tell there that really was driving the motivation of wanting to do that.
There's a Maximum from Limit at one point made the comment, when you drop through the floor, it's going to be a good encounter, right?
Is that just like status now?
It is, yeah. So anytime you want to really sell it, apparently, drop through the floor. That seems to be the thing.
I have to go talk to our dungeon team. He's like, can we just double all of the
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. All right, Manny, go ahead.
I think there are a lot of bosses that really do follow that, like in Blackrock Forge, when you are going up the elevator and then you realize that you are seeing what you're about to face, and so foretelling those sort of fights is a really great thing. But what we saw now in the cinematic was Anduin turning and becoming something quite dark. And if I'm the Winter Queen, I've got to be really scared for how numbered my days are. So I got to ask, like, how are the Covenants reacting to what we saw, the actions of Anduin? Can we expect that we're going to see that like rally into the Maw? And is that going to like ultimately completely change what we did in 9.0 in the Maw? Or are we going to now see those things just added on top of our Maw dailies?
Well, that's a big question. So the events that you saw in the Chains of Domination cinematic, when Chains of Domination goes live, you'll pick up in the aftermath of that. So the Covenants will know about it and will be reacting to that fact. And as you say, they'll quickly math out when the jailer says 3 keys remain, what that means for them. And there's a lot of things, individuals, Covenants that need to be get their defenses in order. But really the theme of Chains of Domination is about, we spent the Shadowlands story building up our individual Covenants. We made a choice, we committed to them, we got anima to restore some of the flow throughout the zone that we were a part of a covenant of. And now it's about those covenants coming together, combining their strengths, playing off one another in ways to take the fight to the jailer. So they don't just want to play on the defensive, they want to go on the offensive. And so that's where the action really kicks in. And when we go into the Maw now, it's going to be in order to get our place of strength. So this new landmass that you saw at the end of the cinematic called Korthia is being pulled into the Maw. Now that's a new part of the Maw to adventure in. And we're going to be encountering secrets there because this was the city of secrets. And there's lots of things that the jailer is looking for there. He specifically targeted this place to pull it into the Maw. And now we'll get to learn what he's after. But in the course of that, as our covenants come into the Maw, we establish a way for them to get in and out, so it's not a one-way trip anymore. And it's going to be about pushing back against the jailer's influence. So you'll find that other parts of the Maw are changing as well. And we'll have these covenant strikes where now we'll see the forces of the covenants hitting at places that we've adventured in before that were super dangerous. And now what happens when a necropolis of the Necrolords comes in and starts bombarding a place? And now we've got those forces that we can fight beside. Now it changes the dynamic quite a bit. And so things like the Eye of the Jailer, for example, that really kind of limited our time. Now, as you're gaining ground, as you're fighting, you're going to be able to push back against its influence and really find new places within the Maw, new opportunities there, and it really changes up the gameplay in some pretty cool and fun ways.
And maybe, just maybe, your mount will finally heed your call.
Maybe. I hear rumors. Who knows, though?
Just not your flying mounts. Just not your flying mount. Yeah.
No, that in the other zones though.
Okay, yeah.
Right.
The jailer still has his limits. He's not going to put up with too much nonsense from you.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Want to touch just briefly on the Mythic Plus scene. Obviously, MDI has been exciting. I've enjoyed watching it this particular season. But I did want to ask: I noticed you've made some major changes, right, going into the next patch, and not even that far out. Looking at tanking, for example, I think the general comment was, it feels like it shouldn't feel like you have to kite all over the dungeon in order to survive at higher level keys, right? Just last night running a 12, like that was super apparent to me. Mistweaver, I'm already running out of mana all the time, which is another issue we should visit on. But in terms of my tank, yeah, he was constantly moving all over the place. So do you see other things like that where we feel like we kind of missed the mark maybe a little bit? Are there other areas that you're currently investigating and looking at making wholesale changes to the way that things play out in Mythic Plus?
Yeah, absolutely. We always look at tuning on, especially on the live game, as a work in progress, right? We're never completely happy with how those things go. Kiting in particular is an interesting one because a lot of our tanks have such good tools to do that. It's like, well, I could take damage or I could not take damage. Which one would I rather do? So a lot of them just end up opting for, the former and just leap away. We actually, we've been trying to be pretty active in tuning a lot of those problem spaces. For instance, a couple of weeks back, I want to say maybe 2 weeks ago, we did look at, those tank buster mechanics that a lot of the trash and the bosses might do, and really tried to wind some of those things back because we were just finding that, some of those in particular could just one-shot your tank, especially if their like active mitigation wasn't up at the time, and that can just lead to chaos or a wipe, and it just didn't feel great. So that's definitely something that we're slowly kind of dialing back and really keeping an eye on. And like you said, in not only in I think you were mentioning 905 that's coming up, there's a lot of class changes in particular, as well as some covenant changes like Fleshcraft is getting completely redesigned coming up here in 905. So those are things that we're always looking at adjusting, and especially with Chains of Domination, where we look at these big, meaty patches. These are times where we have a chance to make potentially larger changes than we would be comfortable making in a hotfix, because we really, don't feel comfortable making, a certain degree of change in a hotfix, because if you're not a player who is, as highly engaged as you are, you might not really realize that thing changed. And we also want to make sure that we have a really high degree of confidence in those changes in a hotfix, because we don't have a PTR or a test environment for people to check that out, give us feedback. We can take another crack at the tuning knobs on it. So those degrees of changes that would really move the needle on some of those topics you're talking about with Chains of Domination, that's absolutely an area that we would look to make adjustments on.
Fair enough.
Okay, so with Mythic Plus in 9.0.5, you're introducing the Valor system, and that is almost that you're taking lessons that you've learned from the PvP, how popular that has been in Shadowlands. So going between seasons now, you have these currencies like Valor that's going to be introduced, and Conquest and so forth, including Stygia. When you're going between seasons, in the past you've reset them, or you have inflated the next tier so that people can't stockpile, or you have just moved to a completely different currency. What are you planning on doing in with these currencies as you go between seasons to avoid some toxic behavior or people feeling like they've fallen behind?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that we're always looking at. And honestly, we get a lot of feedback from, a lot of these really awesome high-end guilds that are just saying like, please don't make us stockpile these. Please save us. Please do something with this. So
give
as
me a
we
break
look at
between
Valor,
tiers.
exactly. So as we're looking at Valor, that's something that we would look to continue to do, where we would, do something like we do with Conquest, where we just we call it versioning it, right? Like you make, all right, we're gonna send you some gold for your Valor, and you're gonna have to re-earn it. And that's absolutely something that we would look to do with the Valor system as well, so that you don't feel like, well, I need to make sure I'm getting a whole bunch of this. For Valor in particular, I think there will actually be an update next week, so that there's a lot the tuning numbers that we have been putting in there, we're continuing to iterate on. But Valor in particular also has a bit lower of a cap than some of these other currencies do. So it just won't be possible to stockpile like months and months and months of it.
Fair enough. Wanted to talk briefly about PvP since we've only got about 8 minutes left here. PvP meta right now, it's a bit bursty.
Oh yeah.
Are you happy? Are you? Yeah. No, it's so funny. So I'm not a serious PvPer. I have a lot of friends that are, and I remember trying to go in, and I main a Mistweaver, so I'm like, oh, maybe PvP will be the thing that we're good at right now. So I jump in, and I'm with it was, I don't know, there's something about it. It's super bursty. If you don't go in with very specific bursty specs, it almost feels impossible to rise up. So is that something you're happy with? Do you have specific things in mind that you're looking at to make PvP feel a little bit more balanced?
Yeah, so we've been trying to take a much more active hand to this expansion with Shadowlands and continuing into Chains of Domination, where we do want to make sure that we're keeping a really close eye on some of those things that, the burst elements of it aren't necessarily a problem, right? Like I feel like if there's a certain amount of buildup or some amount of counterplay, I can see that big attack coming, right? Like I always point to when we talk about this, like, there's that video that we all love. I forget what year it's from. Josh probably remembers of Orange Marmalade, like basically 2v1ing in our BlizzCon tournament. And there's been videos of like dissecting how he was able to do that, right? Like there was a lot of buildup to that moment. And that feels like something that while it might, while he might be able to kill someone really, really quickly, there was a lot of skill and there's some setup, and you also had time to react to that.
Right.
So there's a lot of things that we talk about in terms of the types of bursts that we always want to take a look at in terms of, is this fair or does this just feel bad? Like there's a recent change that we made a few weeks ago where everyone's favorite, Boomkin ability Convoke, it could cast New Moon, which would just, do a ton of damage, and it could happen like right away also. So it just felt, and they can cast that out of stealth, so it just felt like what do you want from me, game? And moments like that we do want to take a look at and say like, okay, can we tune this back a little bit to give the player an opportunity to react? Or in some cases, PvP arenas, rated battlegrounds, it's a team game. Can my teammate do something about this also? And overall, in terms of the pacing, that was a very deliberate decision to essentially remove the item level scaling, where it would, if I'm hitting a much lower item level person, it could change the numbers there. We definitely wanted to take a look at that and say, okay, what if we just took a big step back and see what would happen to the game, see how it would change the pace. And we're overall happy with that direction. I know, for instance, I play a ton of rated battlegrounds. I love rated battlegrounds, and this expansion, it's been really fun. Like you can, get kills and score kills quick enough to where, they can't run back to their corpses or they can't respawn before we can take the point. So we talk about PvP, not just in the arena lens, but also through, battlegrounds as well. And how does that experience feel? Because when, the burst isn't as high as it is right now, It might feel it feels different, I would say, for the arena player, but it can really hurt the experience of a battleground, for instance. So it's definitely something that we're discussing as holistically.
That's fair. That's fair. I'll ask one more question, then I'll let Manny take the last one. This is something that has been talked about a lot on Twitter lately, obviously across the community. Actually, I feel like we've been having this conversation for years, and Ian even alluded to it recently, allowing Alliance and Horde to play with each other. So we understand the line that you guys usually give on this, which is that, at the end of the day, it's core to the Warcraft story. But then every expansion, we end up working together in the end, and we're a happy, not a happy family, but a family by the end of it. At what point, do you just go ahead and let me raid with my friends? I'm an Alliance player that tries to play at a high level, but I have really few options for doing that compared to folks that play on the Horde side. You've done something like that with the PvP system, where you've given a little bit of the ability to do mercenaries and things like that. But at what point do we just allow people to play with each other, bringing the community together instead of dividing them? It used to be in half. Now it's more like 90-10 in some cases, depending on what kind of content you're trying to do.
Well, we talk a lot about the spirit of Warcraft and what it embodies and what it means to us and to the community, to the fans. And you're right. Like we do want to preserve that fundamental Alliance and Horde that, are the DNA of this franchise and have been there since the beginning. And just, we can't do it this year for obvious reasons, but like that sense of when you stand on stage at BlizzCon and you say, you hear a voice say, "Where my Horde at?" And right. That power, we don't want to do anything that would lose that. But, that said, we do always talk about the game and what it needs, and that, the game does change over time, obviously. And so it's not something we're committing to right now. And Shadowlands is continuing that story of the Horde and Alliance working together to help save the Shadowlands and Azeroth as well. And it's something that we'll continue to think about and talk about. Okay. And so It's good to see community reaction and what you guys want to see as well.
And we do recognize the problem that you're discussing, and we there's the story elements that Steve has mentioned. There's also just balance, there's you mentioned the MDI, like Night Elves are really good in the MDI right now in dungeons, and we feel like the balance there is actually okay, but there's definitely the social element to it that we're listening. We definitely can see that and hear the community in that, and are discussing that topic ourselves.
Okay, so I guess just as a last question, with 9.1 and with Warcraft going into the future, what is the aspect that you want fans to be most hopeful about?
That's good.
Well, that's a pretty broad question. I'll take it from a story perspective, and then maybe Morgan can talk about from the aspect of playing the game. But one of the things that was important going into Shadowlands, for example, even though we're going into this realm of death, it's a hopeful place. It's a positive place, and there's a lot to do as the heroes of Azeroth. We can help, we can make a difference, and I think that's an important message that is fundamental to Warcraft's DNA. So I think that no matter what the circumstances of the story are and what some of the characters are going through, like, we always want players to feel like they are some of the beacons of light to this universe, and they're what make Warcraft what it is. And so our storylines, even though sometimes they can go into pretty dark places, we always find a way through. And so that's something that we continue to build upon, I think.
And Steve mentioned this from a hopeful perspective, but in that same light, it's been a really tough year. And as you've seen, Shadowlands and World of Warcraft, we just announced Burning Crusade and Chains of Domination. This is a really vibrant, growing community, and it's so awesome to be able to share in these experiences with everyone around the community, and really just, have found a home in this game over the years. And I, feel like we've got so much momentum behind us, and it, is only going to get better from here. So I'm just super excited about just the future of World of Warcraft.
All right. Well, fantastic, guys. Thanks so much for joining us on this Warcraft Radio interview. You guys have a fantastic rest of the convention. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much. Have a
Thanks.
good night.
Awesome.
You guys.
Discover hundreds of Blizzard podcasts. It works like this. Select your game by title. Then choose your content tags. Read the reviews. Now make your choice. The all-new podcast directory. Only at Warcraft Radio. Find your perfect podcast